Welcome back to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. Folks, today I'm going to be taking you through one of the pitches within the auction pitch or the listing presentation to a seller that I think has been really resonating with a lot of people that we've been doing listing presentations with. As I explained in the episode a little bit here today, is that I've been actually jumping back in every 6 months and doing presentations to sellers around the auction process, to seeing what points of the auction process or the pitch of the auction process are resonating with people more. Obviously, as markets change, locations change, different properties that you're talking to, there's different aspects of the auction pitch that appeal to people differently. And as we go through it, is that this one, the perfect contradiction for a contradicting industry, is auction, is actually a really, really good one for us at the moment, where people have been really captivated, and it's also been elevating their opinion of the agents involved, that ultimately they have a higher real estate IQ. Again, I'll take you through it a little bit further in the episode. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Well, today I wanted to run through what's been working for us out there in the field at the moment when talking to sellers about selling their property through the auction process. It's interesting to see which topics resonate with different types of sellers, but there's one across the board at the moment that I think that when on listing presentations with agents and their clients, is that the one thing that I think at the moment's been really working is the realization of how contradicting the real estate business is. And it's funny when you go through this type of philosophy with a seller and even an agent for the first time, how it really makes them think about how the fundamentals of real estate possibly might be flawed. So recently I've sort of gotten back on the tools, for lack of better terminology, and sort of every 6 or so months I will jump in and start doing listing presentations again to sellers through agents, so that therefore I can understand what types of triggers within the auction process are working best in the current individual market. It's funny. That's probably one of the first learnings that I took over the last number of years, and how quickly the marketplace is changing. High inventory marketplaces, they love the idea of attracting more volume of interest to the property and out profiling, the property based on price and also volume of people that are coming through, getting more than 51% more people through the front door of an auction. In a low inventory marketplace where it's highly competitive, it's where we can get between 8 and 12% more than even a multiple offer situation in a traditional sale through the auction process, and through that transparency that is really one of the big causes. But this one here is seeming to be working very well for us now, and I call it the perfect contradiction for a contradicting business. Give an example of this. Okay, and I'll go through this in a script format, just like I'm presenting it to a seller or an agent for the very first time. So, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, look, it's interesting when we look at the real estate industry as a whole. It's funny how you have to manage greed on the buyer's behalf, but then also we have to manage fear on seller's behalf. Typically, the case is that buyers always want to buy something for a great value. Sellers always want to make sure that they get the most money and are fearful of leaving money on the table. So when it comes down to the real estate process, let me put it to you this way, is that when we have to feed the greed of the buyers, can you imagine putting a property on the marketplace traditionally and putting a sign out the front of your property that said, "I don't need to sell. I will only sell if I get my price. I'm in no rush." How many people do you think would come through the door? Let's say that you put it on Zillow or all of those things in the public remarks or in the description, "I will only sell if I get my price. I don't need to sell, and I'm in no rush." How many people do you think would be running to the property to see the property in every way, shape, and form? Probably not many. Probably not many indeed. But realistically, when it comes down to the actual psychology in the buying process, people always start off the process of buying logically. Let me give you an example of how we need to feed the greed in order to then manage the greed. For example, we put the word auction or even luxury auction or live auction out the front of your property or in the description, and we start marketing live auction or luxury auction. All of a sudden, we have this huge volume of interest in the property. 51+% more people through the front door of an auction property, even if it's listed traditionally previously. Over 1,000% more online hits on that property as well, in comparison to the traditional properties that are marketed around it. So again, just understand real estate in the sense that we have to feed people's greed to get them to the front door, and then we have to then manage that greed that we've created. And that's why auction not only feeds the greed of the buyers and gets them there at the possibility or the perception of possibly getting a deal, also the deadline of the sale. Once they are there and they've given an opportunity to then see the property, maybe fall emotionally in love with it, see it, actually really feel it and buy the property and buy into the property. That's where the auction process then manages their greed. It manages their greed through a set timeline. It manages their greed to a set date. It also allows them to cultivate in their own mind, this could possibly be a great deal for a great home as well. It also puts into the competitive spirit because there's a larger volume of people looking at the property when we restrict the showing times and we get them all in there at once as well. Making sure that we can control the environment to then manage the greed that then is created is the perfect contradiction to a contradicting industry. And auction is the perfect contradiction and the perfect tool to handle that. So again, just to summarize, real estate works very easily. Is that we need to feed the greed in order to get people to the front door. We then need to manage the greed that is then created in order to then optimize your result. And that is a complete contradiction. And auction is the perfect contradiction in order to get you there. So if we were to analyze this a little bit further from an agent standpoint and when we're pitching this to people, is that it's really important that you can give a seller an understanding of a marketplace in a different way that anyone's ever been able to do it. Like, for example, I love the factor that people love the Tom Ferry and the Mike Ferry and the Brian Buffini and all of those different types of training. But if you take all three of their listing presentations that they teach you to do, they're relatively the same. So that's why auction is an incredible part to plug into the business in order to captivate somebody's attention. I've been in more listing presentations than most agents will ever do over their entire career. And realistically is that one of the forming comments is that everybody's usually and typically the same. And they realize that very, very quickly once they've seen two agents, maybe even three. Now, keep in mind is that you're never going to be in competition if ultimately you're cultivating your relationships as well as what you need to. It's usually, hey, come over and sign me up. And then, hey, how should we do this? Realistically is that, though, as you're forging your career, and if you're not happy with where your business is at the moment, you obviously need to grow. And growth comes with dealing with people that you don't already have relationships with. And this is an important skill set in order to be able to differentiate yourself. Auction is that tool. Now, auction is that tool in many, many different segments, but I believe that in the marketplace at the moment that we're currently in, we need to make sure that that the seller understands the triggers in the marketplace. And this is one ultimately that has been working for us really, really well in our listing presentations. It's where a lot of sellers have started then asking questions, being like, that makes sense, making more comments around the process. And that's really interesting to see the different things that sellers really grab onto at different points of the marketplace. Like, for example, one of the other ones that we really get a lot of in different markets, obviously, and different areas that we operate in, a lot of people love the full disclosure of auction up front so that therefore the negotiation has already happened essentially on terms before we get to the price through the auction process. That is something that when sellers have previously been on the marketplace, they really resonate to and they go to quickly. So when we're talking to expired listings or a listing that's already fallen out of escrow once, that is something that they really grasp onto. So there's so many sale points within the auction process that are customized to the individual situation. But at the moment, I really believe that contradiction thing is making sense of a marketplace that doesn't make sense at all. And it also is elevating your level of real estate IQ, so to speak. Right? For lack of better terminology, if I'm trying to over-philosophize at this point, it elevates your level of real estate IQ to them to show them a different perspective rather than, the traditional thing is that, let's face it, if the seller said to you, how are you going to market my property? It's actually one of the most feared questions in real estate. It's not how much is your commission? It's not, are you negotiable on your fee? All those little questions. Realistically, is that when it comes down to it, it is the most feared question in real estate. How are you going to market my property? And if you don't have a good answer to that, then essentially you're bumbling around and not getting to the point. And this gives you that philosophy around why auction can market it bigger in the same pool. We all have the same pool to operate in. We all have the same, pond that we're fishing from, so to speak. In traditional, you are left with a fishing line. With auction, I'm left with a net. And I cast in, and whilst I might bring in some things that are undesirable, realistically, I get to pick and choose what I then can keep. Whereas with your one line and one fishing hook is that you catch the first thing that bites it, and it might not be the ideal end result. So all of this then captivates into, well, what is that net? The word auction. And that's why it is the perfect contradiction for a contradicting process that is real estate. Because traditional is like putting that sign out the front saying, I don't need to sell, I won't sell unless I get my price. And guys, I have to be honest. Yes, there are some properties just flying off the market at the moment because inventory is low, but there are some properties that are sitting. And if there are properties sitting in today's marketplace, you are in some serious trouble and you do need to get creative. So hopefully that's a little gem. I wanted to keep this under 10 minutes for you to actually really be able to use it in the practical element of the business, but make sure you're using auction, the perfect contradiction for a contradicting industry. Thanks for tuning in. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.